request permission to engage enemy paratroopers and attempt to snatch a Grid Papa Uniform 259er, 119er. Break. Enemy is unaware of our presence at this time. Over. Solid copy.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. This is Ben Powers coming at you from the Commander's Voice. I'm really excited. My good buddy Nick Jacobelis is back on the show with us. Longtime viewers will remember Nick is a prolific author, a retired federal law enforcement agent, and is a really excellent historian. He's written a series of books called Front Line Fugitives about cops in World War II, which is an amazing melding of genres. He did an episode with us a few months back where we talked about the first two books in the series, which took two unlikely cops, James Beauregard and Al Parker, a white Southerner and a black New Yorker, and threw them together and made them partners. And they went all the way from the segregated United States into the war zone in Europe in World War II, and they wound up in the Battle of the Bulge. And the next two books in the series that we're going to discuss today talk about their adventures in Europe. So Nick, at first, welcome. And second, if you could take us from the Battle of the Bulge into the third book in the series, GI Gangsters and Collaborators.
Thanks, Ben. Glad to be here. Glad to be back. Book two ends with the good guys going into the Battle of the Bulge. They cross into German lines. They engage an SS unit, and they win. Unfortunately for the Americans at the time, a 26 Volksgrenadier unit of German MPs oversees this. They watch this engagement take place, and by the time they get there, the battle's over. They capture the Americans, these MPs, CID agents, the two main characters. Who's there? Ivan Larson, the main fugitive. They capture him too. So he can't wait now. He's ready. I'm going to be captured by the Germans. Have a nice day. And when they're searching the Americans, they find Al Parker's New York City policeman's badge. They find an arrest warrant for murder, for killing a New York City policeman. They see the CID agents. They have their ID, and they go, "What's this?" And Al Parker takes the lead and says, "That man is wanted for murder. He killed a New York City policeman. I was there when it happened. It was a bank robbery in Brooklyn." This MP sergeant, World War I veteran from Munich, Germany, left Munich Police Department because he just couldn't take this National Socialism thing that was going on, that basically that's the home of it. And he went back in the army, like a lot of Germans, because he just wanted to be a good German soldier. So now he's an MP. He was a cop in Munich, and he's standing there with this New York City badge. He says, "Okay, take him. He's yours." So they turn the prisoner over. So they become kind of like, it's a cop thing. We're in the middle of a war, but this takes precedent. He killed a New York City policeman. So, I don't want him as a prisoner because then he'll get lost in the crowd and he could survive. So they turn him over. Americans take the prisoner. General Trumbull shows up. He's the general that originally we talked about. He gets on a B-25 going to Europe to the ETO, and he looks at Major Beauregard and he says, "Why do you have your driver with you? I can't take my driver with me. I got to talk to Ike about this." And he goes, "He's not my driver. He's my partner." So this general is also another character who's evolving with this story, because Al Parker's the pivot man in this as far as the segregation issues go. And he shows up, and Al Parker ends up getting a Silver Star. They take Ivan Larson back to the States, and Jim Beauregard becomes a lieutenant colonel and is tasked with going to Paris, which has got a major black market problem. And he asks Al to go with him. Al gets a commission. He's a lieutenant, and the two of them go. And they get there in the middle of a joint investigation between Army CID agents and the Paris police. And they knew this from their prior visit to Paris before they got into Bastogne. They had to go through the UK, they went through England, and then they ended up in Paris, and before they transitioned. So they already met the previous commanding officers, so they had a taste for what was happening there. So being cops, they took on the mission. And what happened in Paris, as we talked about before, that people need to know why they had a black market problem in Paris. Like, why did it just explode? I mean, it happened in Naples, Italy. It happened in a lot of places where there was a lot of American supplies, because people in war zones were in need. But in Paris, the reasons were really deep. The German occupation basically decimated the French economy. The French were paying the Germans something like 500 million francs a day for the honor of being occupied by the German army. And when they left Germany to flee the Allied efforts after Normandy, two things contributed to this. One, the Allies had to bomb every train that was running that we could find, because it was just standard operating procedure to destroy the enemy's opportunity to load up men and supplies and take off or be resupplied. The other problem was all the trucks that they could steal, that the Germans could steal, they stole. So supplies that were in outlying areas could not be taken into Paris. Who shows up now with train loads of supplies? The United States Army. So naturally, when people are hungry and they'd like to have a cigarette, when they need gasoline and fuel, you have this problem where it was the perfect storm for criminal enterprise to take over. There were two kinds of basically black market operators. They were the active duty military personnel who stole whatever they could steal, did their job, and ran into town at night or whenever they were off and traded cigarettes and rations. A lot of money involved. I mean, a lot of thievery. They weren't saints, but they just stayed doing their military jobs. The Americans who became deserters, who basically went into the black market, a lot of them ran the gamut from either people that were totally committed to a life of crime to people that kind of went on leave and decided to overstay their leave and then got basically recruited by some black market operation, as an example. And this is how CID agents now are trying to catch these guys. So what do? CID agents are hanging out in bars in Paris. And they're also watching every warehouse they could observe, because warehouses were one of the #1 places for black market operators to operate from, for one main reason. They had to hide their vehicles. Somewhere in the neighborhood of 4,000 U.S. Army vehicles, mostly trucks, some Jeeps, even motorcycles, were stolen by these black market. 4,000. I mean, it's a lot.
That's an amazing amount.
Yeah. And when there was one MP detention facility, just one, that had like 1,300 prisoners in it. American troops arrested for everything from fighting to whatever. Half of them were deserters and involved in the black market. Just one detention facility. So you had this situation where there were certain, we'll call them enterprises in the U.S. Army at the time, either that went through Paris or were based in Paris, that became the hot zones for black market opportunities. The POL, petroleum oil lubrication dumps, were like one of the first ones to basically become a huge moneymaker. And the reason why was when the US and Allied troops were basically going through France in pursuit of the German army, any American vehicle or Allied vehicle that showed up that needed fuel was gassed up. No questions asked. They got topped off. If you had 200 empty jerry cans, you got 200 empty jerry cans in return that were full. The American Army back then, as you know, ran on handwritten notes. They were little slips. This wasn't a computer-generated military. Everything was done like, hey, my CO, like, this one lieutenant out of the entire army that signed it. So even when things calmed down, the POL dumps became hotbeds of black market opportunities because they knew how easy it was to get rid of this fuel. If you showed up with a Jeep and opened up the back and it had 50 jerry cans in it, and you cut the sergeant in charge of the POL dump in, you got 50 cans of fuel. They sold every jerry can for $100 in the black market. A private back then made 500. A corporal made 6 and change. Sergeants made like between 7 and around just under $1,200 a year.
So I got a couple questions.
Fire away.
Because I find this fascinating. I know we got to get into the actual story of James and Al a little bit, but the idea that you've got this underground economy which is providing stuff that the people of France, the people of Paris need, and I get that it's definitely a criminal enterprise and there's a lot of money to be made, but if the Allies, if the Americans and the French civil authorities were able to shut this down, I mean, how much damage could that have actually done to people's, just daily standard of living? I'm almost getting the impression that I'm not condoning crime, but I'm like, without this, it seems as though recovery would have actually taken longer. Like this, at some level, this shadow economy was necessary for people to actually be able to get back on their feet.
Well, you're right.
Yeah. So my question is, in your research, did you find that a blind eye to a certain degree was turned to these activities to allow some level of normalcy to be returned, or were people like, hey, we just need to go after the real blatant criminals, or was the intent to, hey, we got to shut this down, we got to get this material up to the fighting men? What was the official, actually, let me rephrase that. What was the unofficial stance towards some level of black marketing?
Well, they took it very seriously, but it's kind of like the drug war. I mean, everybody knew what was going on, but it wasn't like there was 2 million U.S. customs agents serving with me when I served. And look at the border. I mean, I've been along the Mexican border. It's just vast. So the problem was so overwhelming. The real issue is it wasn't until May of 1945 that Yank magazine published an article about the black market operations in Paris. The war's over now. This is how serious it was taken. And I think it was a combination of military people that were, the U.S. Army, as you know, was so wealthy when it came to supplies. It was just such a vast machine. When we get into the next book, there's a place in Liege, Belgium, designated Q-179. When General Trumbull gives them their orders to go into Germany, and please stop, do me a favor, do something about this Q-79 on the way. Q-79 was estimated of losing 15 to 20% of its inventory a month. Can you imagine your local Costco store losing 15 to 20% a month due to theft? And the Army knew this.
I'm trying to imagine the commander not being relieved for losing 15 to 20% of their inventory monthly.
You know, there's a couple of MPs standing there. You know, every once in a while they lock up somebody who's stealing 50 case of cigarettes or some deep chocolate D bars, and they look like they're doing something. It was overwhelming. I mean, there weren't enough MPs. I mean, just to have, how do you hunt down 4,000 stolen vehicles alone? I mean, there's a war going on.
So for this level of organization and this level of trafficking, I get what you're saying. There were guys who they did their day jobs and then they made some money on the side at night selling a carton of cigarettes or some jerry cans of gas. And then you had the deserters who were part of more established criminal enterprises. But how far up the chain of command did this go that you saw in your research? I mean, there had to have been some fairly significantly mid-level officers who were turning a blind eye to a lot of stuff.
There were other situations where a POL dump was turning a blind eye to a black market operation. And there were two captains involved that just said, yeah, give me a piece of the action. It was casual. And they got a piece of the action. And until somebody got arrested and flipped, just like you do in any other police drama case, you would never know about it. But somehow things like that came out. So there were commissioned officers involved. You know, I don't think anybody above the rank of captain I ever ran into in any of the research. But still.
Interesting. So when you have James and Al are in Paris, they've gotten their fugitive back to the United States. They've been reassigned to this black marketing operation. Do you introduce any French characters into the narrative at this point? The people,
yes.
Cops that they're working with?
Yes, French police. The head of the French police unit they worked with was another World War I combat veteran. So they had that past history to share, him and Al Parker. And the other cops worked on surveillances with the American CID agents, made arrests, went on raids, had a couple of shootings with them. So yeah, they were integrally involved.
You made a really interesting point there because Al, as in his backstory, is a World War I veteran, and I believe he was a Harlem Hellfighter, which is a black American infantry unit that made their combat debut as integrated into French organizations because of the stereotypical attitude towards African American combat troops at the time. So there must have been a significant relationship between those two characters when he realized Al's background.
Yes. Al's son ends up getting involved with the French police chief's daughter. And I wanted to bring out how when they got married, there was one particular member of the CID team who was from a part of the country where at that time, segregation was still a big deal. And most of the country was actually the whole country was like that. Some places were a little bit more hospitable than others. And he didn't really want to go to the wedding. And he felt bad about it. He ended up showing up. So I tried to bring out through these characters how things were back then. Cruel as they were at the time, some people made an effort to work it out and other people didn't.
So when Alan James and their French comrades are going after the black marketeers, are they following a specific trail to identify a hub, if you will, of how these goods are being transacted into the underground economy, or are they just having hit or miss successes at the lower level, nabbing guys here or there? Are they able to break the back of anything, or do they just take their small victories where they can?
They work the black market investigations just like law enforcement people do in the US and elsewhere all over the crime epidemic. You start off with a fresh sheet of paper, and before you know it, an NP grabs somebody. Somebody surrenders because he's just tired of this rat race. He wants to go back in the army, and they start flipping people, and people cooperate. Or they find out that so and so a warehouse gets followed. There was a medic who deserted, who became he anointed himself as a lieutenant. He impersonated an officer. They started an MP unit. They stole vehicles. They had military police on their Jeeps. They had motorcycles. He had like 40 to 60 people working with him at any one time. They had a big warehouse where they could park their stolen vehicles. They had like 20, 30 vehicles. And these guys ran them up for 4 months. That's how hard it was to catch some of these guys at the time. And they would hijack trucks on the highway and leave a driver in the middle of nowhere. Say, did you steal this stuff? No, sir, I'm going to like so. No, have a nice day. You stole it. And they would take it. And 4 months is a long time. Can you imagine hiding out in a major city, impersonating a military policeman and pulling it off? You would think that would be impossible to do in a place where everybody's supposed to be checked constantly. Are you on leave? Let me see your pass. And these guys are MPs. So who's going to stop them? It was a good scam from a criminal enterprise standpoint, but they got arrested.
So certainly hiding in plain sight, as it were. So what's the climactic event in book 3 as Al and James get deeper into investigating, and they go from that blank sheet of paper to flipping the lower level guys and working their way up the chain?
When as book 3 comes to a close, General Tremble shows up because at this time the Allies are getting involved in the invasion of Germany. And he goes, look, because I need you guys to do something else now. First, I want you to set up, when we get to Berlin, because everybody thought we were going to get to Berlin first, not the Russians. When we get to Berlin, I want you to set up the CID office, which had to get set up anyway eventually, no matter who got there first. I want you to go to Q179 because I got this little problem in Leeds, Germany. And I need you to kind of like get into this place, wrap it up. We need these supplies. I can't have 15 to 20% of these supplies stolen. We need them for this invasion. So they take care of that. They send a team of undercover people in. And then I want you to go after this. We have this problem with these SS werewolves where, the Germans are now talking about having this Alpine redoubt where they're going to basically hunker down with all their supplies that they can ship into these mountains, the Alpine passes and whatnot, and just fight us endlessly until they run out of ammunition, I guess. He goes, we need to nip this in the bud. So do what you can for that and go after this SS unit, which they find out about. That is basically, they're using these SS units to spearhead and train and organize these werewolf units.
And that's a really exciting transition into book 4, which is werewolves and war criminals. So they're up in Liège, Belgium, and they're at, was it Q179er? And then how do they transition from working black market, or do they actually have like a change of mission going into book 4?
That was a change. When they sent the undercover team in, they nipped the bud of the problem in Q179. They got the people involved. They shut it down. It was reinforced, and they were able to like leave Dodge with a successful interdiction. Everything went fine. Their next stop is near the bridge of Remagen, because when they were talking to General Tremble, they said, General, we had this situation when you showed up and met us in the outskirts of Bastogne. This German MP helped us out. He turned Ivan Larson over to us because he was a cop in Germany, and now he's an MP sergeant, and he's responsible for us not being in a POW camp. And we'd like to look for him because Army intelligence said that the 26th Volksgrenadier those that are prisoners are ending up in this one of 200 open air camps that was in Remagen. General Trumbull now really likes these guys. He goes, well, I'm putting money on this, back at Schaeff there. So I'm betting that you're going to find him because you guys end up doing a lot of wacky stuff and pulling it off. So they go to this open air camp in Remagen, and when they get there, they're like shocked. The place stinks. There's just stranded barbed wire around this massive open air encampment, a bunch of American Army MPs standing there. And there's a tent where the commanding officer of this MP detachment is got his little office. And they hear shots fired. And there's a little clamoring of activity, and the MPs race down to the Rhine River. And they thought it was an escape attempt, but it wasn't. It was just the Germans wanting to get some water. And Al Parker and Major, well, he's now a Lieutenant Colonel Beauregard, they're going, water. What kind of prison camp is this? It's filthy. There's no buildings. There's nothing. Prisoners laying on the ground. And there's an interesting book called Other Losses that goes into how Germans who were captured at the end of the war, if it was the day after the war, were considered disarmed enemy combatants. They weren't, or enemy prisoners. They weren't considered those who were able to get the benefits of the Geneva Convention, and they didn't. And the American MP commander explains this to them. He says, well, I wish I could have them assembled, because he says, look, we're looking for this German MP sergeant. Good luck. There's like 100,000 people in this camp. He goes, well, we have some food, we have medical supplies, we have a medic with us. We'll give out, like, when's your next food supply delivery? And he goes, like, in 2 days. 2 days? We don't feed them. We feed them when we can. So they basically give up all the food they can, and their medic starts to treat wounded Germans and sick people. And they go in the camp unarmed. The MP's going, you can't go in there. He goes, no, we're okay. And they go in there. And when the announcement's made that anyone who's wounded or sick should come to the front gate, you had Hans Sigmund and his son, who was shot down trying to bomb and strafe the Remagen Bridge. He had been captured. So he ended up in the same place. He was a Luftwaffe pilot. And they go, let's go to the front gate and get your medical care because the kid's sick. And lo and behold, they walk right into Al Parker and James Beauregard. And it's one of those scenes where, another thing, cops, they just identify. And Hans Sigmund looks like you slept outdoors in the mud for some period of time, unshaven, hungry, not feeling very well. And they basically say, look, we have orders right here signed by an American Army general that we can take two Germans, have them discharged from the German Army, and we're going to bless you. You'll be German police. And we need you to help us when we go in. We got to end this thing. And we got these young kids running around, these werewolves. We got to stop this stuff. And they go along. They let them wash. They give them clean uniforms, and they join the unit. Interesting thing, they latch on to, they invade Germany at the tail end of a French army unit. And it's interesting because here we have a segregated American army and 3 different major units in the French army: Moroccan troops, Algerian troops, Commonwealth troops from Africa. And they're like the most troops they're following an African-American, not an African-American, but an African and colonial army from different places in Africa. With French officers. And there's a scene where the French CO of this unit that they're tagging behind, he has a little issue with these 2 Germans armed, as policemen, and he gets over it. And I use that as another example of how, look, we got to patch this up. You want to keep this war going on? And they come to a meeting of the minds. And there's an ambush in the Black Forest, which happened. There's actually film footage on it of the French army repelling this ambush. And I had them, that's their first taste of battle as a unified entity with the 2 Germans that are now civilian policemen. And they're fighting the same SS, now they're fighting the SS unit that they're going after with these kids that are these werewolves. And the story then goes deeper. When they get to Austria, I think it was called Q5. It was an Austrian militia unit, basically. They escort them like 60 kilometers or whatever into Germany through Austria. And Hans Sigmund, his wife is from a town in Oberstdorf, which is the southernmost town in Germany. And not that far away in Langerfield, there's an SS training camp for werewolves. So when I did all the research and I found all this stuff out, I said, great, we're going to have these guys go this route because it's legitimate. There was this SS training camp in this town, and it wasn't far from Oberstdorf. And also now we get there, and who do they run into on the road but the police chief from Oberstdorf and some civilians who are wearing this armband because they belong to this unit called the Himmelschutz. And they were Bavarian Catholics who just had it with the Nazis, and they took over their town. Now, they did it at the very end of the war. You know, I mean, it was not like they did it in 1943. They wouldn't have lasted very long. But, you know, they did what they could to just say, we've had it with you guys. They're American prisoners of war there, too. And there were SS, there was a hospital there. And last book comes to a conclusion when they're hunting down this German SS unit. And they're up in a place called Kempter Ute, which exists. And it's up in an alpine pasture. And you can go there today and go skiing. It was built back in the 1830s, and it was expanded and redone in like 1931 or 32. And it was the perfect place to hold up. And the American contingent, with some of the civilians from this Himmelschutz unit from the town of Oberstdorf, go up there to go after this SS major. And that's the end of the action in book 4.
So that just is remarkable from the standpoint of you take the readers from book 1 through book 4 from literally a Jim Crow society in the United States, and in the span of 3 years you've got integrated policing, you've got a great examination of the black market, you've got a great examination of the werewolf concept that the Germans were plan on using at the end of World War II. And you really address a lot of stuff that you don't get in the popular narrative of World War II, where everybody really focuses on the greatest generation, Tom Brokaw kind of stuff. So you really examine a lot of stuff that I find is left out of a lot of literature on the war. What was your motivation to look at the arc of the war from that perspective?
You know, as a kid who grew up watching black and white World War II movies and later on evolving and seeing that there was more to the story, and the more that I read, I realized that this is the real story of World War II. Nobody knows about the thievery and power. John Wayne didn't make a movie as a CID agent, hunting down deserters, because if that happened, then people in 1942 or 43, even in 1944, knew what was going on. They wouldn't cooperate with rationing in the United States. They say, what are you, crazy? You can't lock these guys up over there. I have to ration meat and cigarettes and car tires and gasoline. Not happening. And I think they just kept it quiet. And the proof of it is that in May of 1945, Yank magazine was given the authority to publish an article about this. And they make it look like, oh, wow, what a great deal we did. No, really, you didn't do a great deal. This was a crime in and of itself. And it should have never happened. They could have given the French cigarettes and food and probably saved 2/3 of what was stolen and kept it in the pipeline to resupply Allied troops. Rather than have, 2/3 of it get stolen by bad guys and nobody benefits from it except a bunch of bad guys. This is another thing that it boggled my mind. The U.S. Army allowed gambling profits to be sent home. They didn't realize if you play cards and earn $1,000, which is like a fortune, 2 years pay as a private, and you go to the Army office, the post office, you could send home a war bond, you could send your cash home. They didn't connect the dots and realize that if I'm in the black market, they arrested an Army officer, sent $38,000 home. In 1944, $38,000.
Oh my gosh, that is a fortune in 1944.
So the Army actually created an atmosphere where if you wanted to send part of your pay home, that's one thing. But if you have gambling money, how do you separate gambling profits from black market profits? So they actually created, and that's how the CID unit, the task force in New York, gets involved in one of their cases. Because while they're going after bad guys that are involved in black market operations, who also were shipping cash home, they end up following some of these bad guys' relatives in New York City. And the guys that start off in book one end up raiding a place and getting in a gunfight with people that were involved in the tail end of this black market operation.
That's just amazing, the international tapestry that you were able to weave with this. And I appreciate what you're saying, that John Wayne couldn't have made this kind of movie during the war because it wouldn't have been there to enhance morale. But at the same time, there's a part of me that was I would really like to have seen John Wayne playing Jim Beauregard and maybe Sidney Poitier playing Al Parker. And I think that would have been a pretty cool duo telling this story.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of actors that could play both of those roles that I think would be able, today especially, that would be a well-received duo because we've moved on.
Definitely.
Despite
I
what
know
some
you
people think.
I know you wrote this originally as a screenplay before you transitioned into novels. So just indulging a little fantasy for a second. If you got green lighted today, who would you want to play in today's actors? Who would you want to play James and Al?
I thought, every once in a while when I think about that, I have to go back on and watch movies of current actors. And, there's a couple that this went on for 16 years. I mean, by the time I wrote the screenplay and finished the first two books and doing the research, and then another year to do book 3 and 4. So over the span of Andy, what's his name? Glover was going to be the first Al Parker. He's too old now.
Danny Glover.
Danny Glover
Okay, I can see
couldn't do
that.
it. I met Cole Hauser. He's a great guy. He could probably play Major Beauregard. He's about that. He's okay age-wise now, and he's a great actor, and he's a very nice. His mom's a great person too. I met him. He expressed an interest at one point in doing controlled delivery, and that's another story how Hollywood doesn't work. If you meet 7 people in Hollywood to negotiate a deal, and one of those folks gets involved in another project, the whole thing will cave because they can't. And I used to say to them, well, if I'm working a case and one of the agents I'm working with transfers to Timbuktu, we don't shut things down and let bad guys get away. We just bring another agent in, or we work it without that help. That's too much over here. So that's why it takes like 10 years for a movie to get made in Hollywood. But maybe it'll happen one day. You never know.
That would be cool. I'm thinking because I'm guessing that how old are Beauregard and Parker? I picture them in their late 40s.
Yes. Well, the World War, James Beauregard was in the punitive expedition into Mexico, and it was a firearms instructor during World War I, and Al was a combat troop. So yeah, they're now, and they were cops for like 20 years. So they're in their 40s, late 40s.
Gotcha.
46,
So
47.
I'll be honest, in my brain right now, and I know we're just kind of messing around for the audience, but current actors, I'm picturing like Idris Elba and Matthew McConaughey. I could see that
They're
there.
good too. There's a lot of good. Yeah, I mean, the both of them would be great. I mean, there's so many talented people, and there's unknowns out there. You watch movies sometimes and you go, who is that actor? Is great, and it's somebody who's probably done a few things, but nothing of any significance that the public really knows of. It's not. It's a play they did or whatever, and yes, there's a lot of talent out there.
That's cool. I would love to see some of your work get onto the big screen. That's for sure. But this has just been a fascinating ride and forcing me. My interest, my background, I kind of focus on what most guys focus on, the front line stuff. And you taking this deep dive into a different facet of the war has really been an education for me. So I appreciate you coming on the show as always, Nick. And I always learn something when we talk, man. What are your closing comments for the audience about Front Line Fugitives?
Well, I guess the best way to put it is it's the story about World War II that was really never told in one piece. The research is there if you want to read dozens and dozens of books. So I guess it's something that I wanted to compartmentalize into a 4-book series that told a different slice of what what was really going on in the war.
Yeah, well, you definitely succeeded. So guys, again, my guest today has been Nick Jacobelis. We've been talking about the last 2 books of his 4-book series, Front Line Fugitives. So I highly recommend you check it out on Amazon. It's easily available. You can get it in your mailbox, ASAP as soon as you put it into your cart and hit purchase. So Nick, thanks for being a great guest as always. Thanks for coming on the show. And I really, really always enjoy having you on.
Same here, Ben. I always enjoy it. My regards. Take care and thank you very much.